It was a cold morning in December. The sky was gray, and the wind touched my face like tiny needles. I pulled my scarf tight and walked to the bus stop. I was late. Again. That was the first time I saw him. He stood under the old tree, near the bench. He had a black coat and a book in his hand. His hair moved with the wind, and he looked calm, quiet, lost in thought. I didn't know his name. I didn't know who he was. But something in my heart felt different. It was like my world stopped for a second, just to look at him. He looked up. And for a second, our eyes met. My heart jumped. I looked away quickly, feeling shy. He smiled a little. A soft, gentle smile. Like he knew something I didn't. Every morning after that, I hoped to see him. And he was always there, reading, thinking, waiting for the same bus as me. But we never spoke. Not even once. I would look at him from the corner of my eye. I watched the way he held his book. The way he smiled at children passing by. The way he closed his eyes to feel the wind. It was quiet love. A love that had no words. No promises. Just silence. At night, I would sit by my window and write about him in my diary. I called him the boy under the tree. I didn't know his story, but I made one in my mind. Maybe he was a writer. Or a dreamer. Or someone who had a broken heart. Just like me. Sometimes, I thought about saying hello. But the word stayed locked inside. My fear was bigger than my hope. What if he didn't see me the way I saw him? What if he walked away? What if I ruined the magic? So, I stayed quiet. And loved him. In silence. Days turned into weeks. The bus came and went. People changed. Seasons changed. But he stayed the same. And so did my heart. One morning, he didn't come. I waited for him. 10 minutes. 20 minutes. But the bench was empty. The tree stood alone. And the cold wind felt even colder. I felt something heavy in my chest. It was the first time I realized. He had become part of my day. Part of my smile. Part of my silence. That day, I understood something important. Sometimes, the heart speaks the loudest in silence. And I had loved him. Every single day. Without saying a word. A week passed. He didn't come. Every morning, I stood at the bus stop. I looked at the tree. At the bench. But there was no sign of him. The days felt long and cold. Even the sky looked sad. Without him, everything was quiet, but not the good kind of quiet. It was the kind that hurt. I didn't write in my diary that week. I just stared at the pages. Blank. Like my mornings now. I missed him. Even though I had never known his name. Even though we had never talked. I still missed him. I started to think. Maybe he had moved away. Or maybe he had changed his route. Maybe I would never see him again. That thought made my heart ache. Then, one morning, he was there. Just like before. standing under the tree, holding his book. But something was different. His smile was gone. His eyes looked tired. He didn't look up. My heart jumped again, this time with worry. I wanted to ask him, "Where were you? Are you okay? Did something bad happen?" But I stayed silent. Just like always. I stood beside the bench, closer than I had ever been. He turned his head slightly, and our eyes met again. But this time there was no smile. Only sadness. And something else. Something I didn't understand. He looked away. And I looked down. The bus came. We both got on. He sat near the window. I sat 3 seats behind him. I watched the back of his head the whole ride. He didn't read his book that day. He just stared outside the window. Like he was looking for something. Or someone. When he got off the bus, I stayed behind. I watched him walk away. My fingers held my diary tight in my bag. I wanted to run to him. To say, "I'm here." To say, "I missed you." To say anything. But my feet didn't move. My lips stayed closed. And I knew. Once again. I had let the moment pass. That night, I opened my diary. And for the first time, I wrote his name. Not his real name, because I still didn't know it. But I gave him one. Eli. It felt right. Soft. Kind. Sad. Just like him. And under that name, I wrote, "He came back." But his smile didn't. I looked at the stars outside my window. And I made a promise to myself, if I ever saw him sad again, I would speak. Even if my voice shook. Even if my heart raced. Even if it changed everything. Because sometimes, love can't stay silent forever. The next day, I wore my favorite coat. I brushed my hair twice. And I left the house a little earlier than usual. I didn't know why. Maybe I just wanted more time. To see him. To feel brave. He was there again? Under the same tree. Wearing the same black coat. Holding the same book. But this time, he looked up first. And he smiled. It was not a full smile, just a small one. But it was enough. Enough to make my heart feel warm. Even in the cold morning air. I smiled back. For the first time. Something changed in that moment. Something small, but powerful. We didn't say anything. But it felt like we had spoken. Like our hearts had shared a secret. I stood closer to him that day. Close enough to smell the pages of his book. Close enough to hear him breathe. He turned to me and said, "Cold morning, isn't it?" His voice was soft. Deep. Gentle. Just like I imagined. "Yes," I said. And that was all. But it was everything. We stood in silence again, but this time, it felt different. Not heavy. Not lonely. It felt peaceful. The bus came. We got on together. And this time, he sat beside me. My hands were shaking inside my pockets. but I smiled through it. He looked at me and asked, "Do you always catch this bus?" I nodded. "Every day," I said. He laughed softly. I thought I was the only one who came this early. "No," I said. "I've been here too. I noticed you." He looked at me with gentle eyes. "Really?" he said. I nodded again. "Yes. Every day." He smiled a little wider this time. And my heart smiled with him. We didn't talk much more that ride. But something had opened. A door. A window. A chance. That evening, I wrote in my diary. Today, I spoke to Eli. Today, he spoke to me. Today, I was not afraid. And for the first time, I didn't feel like just a girl who loved in silence. I felt seen. I felt heard. I felt like maybe this story was just beginning. After that morning, things slowly began to change. We started sitting together on the bus. Not every day, but often enough to make my heart feel full. Sometimes we talked about books. Sometimes about the weather. Sometimes we just sat in silence. But that silence no longer hurt. It felt warm. Like a quiet song only we could hear. One morning, he told me his real name. "Elliot," he said, smiling shyly. "But you can call me Eli if you like." I smiled. I didn't tell him. I had already named him Eli in my heart. I just said, "Okay. Eli." That day, he asked if I liked tea. I said yes. So we sat on a bench after the bus ride, holding warm cups of tea, watching people walk by. He told me about his father, how he had passed away last year. That's why he had stopped coming for a while. "I didn't want to see anyone," he said. "I just needed to be alone." I looked at him and said softly, "I noticed your silence. Even when you were gone?" He looked at me with eyes full of meaning. And for a moment, we both just breathed. No words. Only understanding. After that, we met often. Not just at the bus stop. But in the park, at the cafe, by the river. Each time, I spoke a little more. And each time, he listened with care. One day, as we walked through falling leaves, he stopped. He looked at me and said, "I used to think I was alone. But now, I know I wasn't. You were always there, quiet, but close." Tears filled my eyes. I wanted to tell him everything. How I had loved him from the start. How I had watched him from a distance. How I had written about him in my diary, every single night. But I just whispered. He took my hand gently. And in that moment, I didn't need to say anything more. Because he knew. He knew everything. Without me saying a word. And just like that, the silence that once kept us apart had brought us together. That night, I opened my diary for the last time. I wrote, "I loved him in silence. But now, he loves me in return. And silence is no longer empty. It is full. Full of memories, full of smiles, full of love." And I closed the book, not because the story was over, but because a new one was just beginning.